Hey, it's Christina. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to The Squeeze.
My highest value is freedom. It's not autonomy, it's actually like untethered freedom.
Today on the show, I'm speaking with Jennifer Deane. Jennifer is a professionally certified coach, consultant, and facilitator, and I've known Jen for about 10 years since we first connected professionally inside healthcare. Since that time, we've collaborated on numerous projects, and we've set up what kind of amounts to our little mutual admiration society as comrades in our quest for balance. Jen is the creator and designer of some pretty successful online leadership programs, namely Leaderstamp and Managing People and Teams, that both target new and emerging leaders. She seems to get a kick out of helping organizations figure out how do you promote leaders from within, which I think we can all agree is a pretty smart thing to do right now given the zany job market. And she's also created another program called Promote Ability. Jen has lots of experience in my industry, over 20 years like me. And like me, she's been perpetually interested in the entrepreneurial angle of how to best deliver something like leadership coaching and development. And what I've long admired about Jen is how well she pivots and adapts her business model to respond to environmental trends. But even more importantly, how she follows her own bliss and zest and interest, seemingly unafraid to change direction and move away from something that, to all intents and purposes, was objectively successful. And that is mostly why I wanted to invite Jen to speak to me today, so we can try to elucidate further on the complex dance that everyone does with time, what it means to arrange and organize the limited time that we have been given in this life. Now, not long ago, I dropped a podcast episode specifically on time management. And Jen told me that after listening to it, one of the central ideas from the podcast really sparked something for her. It was the concept of finitude, or the state of having limits or bounds. What you need to understand is just how seriously Jen and I took the idea of managing time. We actually spent 2 years working together on a research project into our different approaches to time management and our relationship to our calendars. Using a human systems dynamics framework called adaptive action, we examined the culture of time management issues inside healthcare, noting that there was an abundance of overwhelm that we were continually being confronted with in the leaders that we were supporting with coaching. Ultimately, I think it was the culture of overwhelm that led us both to leave healthcare and consult from the outside in. And through our research project, I think it's safe to say that we both discovered a deeper appreciation for how we ultimately decide to spend our time. Jennifer lives, works, and plays in North Van with her husband, 2 daughters, and a puppy. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. And now, here's Jen. So welcome to you, Jen. Thanks for being here.
Very excited to be here, Christina, and continue our long time conversation.
Yes, we have been pretty fixated on that notion of time management. So I thought I would just start because when I dropped that podcast that was really focusing on Oliver Burkeman's work, you said that the concept of finitude just like really stuck with you. You were very excited about that. You texted me right away. Can you tell me a little bit about like what did that unlock for you?
Yeah. Well, so time is a limited resource, and it's one of the only resources that I see as having limits. And so for me, it really hit home that it was a finite resource. So, and early in my career, I had some more scarcity versus abundance. And so it really impacted what I said yes to, and I found myself, overcommitted. And so when I think about how I manage my time and opportunities, finitude really is the current guideline. It's the boundary that provides boundless fulfillment, and so it just really hit home with me. And I ended up putting it on my phone as a picture so that when I get to my unlock screen, it just guides my thinking around commitments, life, everything.
Wow. And yet, I think a lot of people, when confronted with the notion of finitude, might have a different response, might have a bit of a different, um, maybe a bit of fear, maybe a bit of anxiety. But I'm hearing from you, it elevated your experiences, or it is
It
elevating your experiences.
absolutely. And it's interesting because starting out as a coach, you're like, you can achieve anything. The limits, there are none, right?
Yeah.
And it now to have come full circle really with that limits are actually where my freedom sits and where I feel
Wow.
it is so
Hmm.
interesting to me.
Yeah, what a beautiful paradox. And I think, I'm always off doing these deep dives into different topics, and I won't scare listeners with the topic of death just yet, but there is a way in which I think there's a lot of parallels in a lot of spiritual traditions of exactly what you just said, that limits offer freedom, that when we are confronted with the limit, then there's almost like an enforcement of the enjoyment of whatever it is that we're up to in a bit of a different way. Is that sort of parallel what you're experiencing?
Absolutely. And it started for me actually. I hadn't put it together till you used that word and I really resonated. But it started with, for me, with having limits and getting into sort of a niche in terms of my work. And when I was able to limit that, I felt just so much power and actually so much opportunity. And then so it's almost like it's now it come even more into the way I design my life with limits and boundaries, including with people. And it's just really taken up now its own energy and absolutely feels to me very powerful.
Yeah. And I think this is a great place to sort of segue into another piece, because it sounds like having that sort of, you've unleashed this power by confronting these limits. And since you and I have known each other, you've made some pretty big changes to your lifestyle. So just to kind of reflect, you and I met when we were working inside healthcare, then you left paid employment. You went on to do some consulting. You did a lot in person. Then you shifted your business, I remember, to be 100% virtual. You were very much about, I don't want to drive places. I was kind of like, wow, you can do that. Next, you built a successful online program for women leaders. You've done a lot of things I think other coaches and consultants, including myself, would be pretty envious of. And now here you are making another big shift, perhaps a little bit more away from coaching. So, two things. Help me understand, like, what is guiding you to do
Mhm.
those changes, and then secondly, where do you get the chutzpah to go so big and risk? So how about the
Um,
first one? What's guiding you?
yeah. My highest value is freedom. It's not autonomy. It's actually like untethered freedom, like absolute no limit. Like it's interesting because we're talking about
Yeah,
limits, but
I heard you. Hmm.
freedom, and so as well as purpose. So there's a kind of a self-focused guidance around that top value that guides me in making a lot of decisions, and also in having purpose and discovering, which I'm still doing, my purpose in the world, and I still have yet to discover more there. And where I want to make an impact, and so it's that discovery quest of what is that impact, and then also this like need for freedom, this desire to live in a way that where I can be where I want to be, do what I want to do whenever I want, without having a lot of expectations on me, essentially. So a lot of the career decisions and the move toward being virtual, and then even moving away from coaching, which was 23 years, an incredible 23 years of one-to-one coaching,
Wow.
was really guided by knowing there's something different I want to contribute to, and wanting less appointments in my day.
Yeah. So then it's one thing to, I get everything you're saying, like the whole notion of freedom, and then the purpose, and then lots and lots of discovery that's going on. But so then how do you manage the fear? And maybe I'm assuming that there is fear there in the ambiguity, or those moments in between, or, that proverbial sort of metaphor of the
Mhm.
trapeze bars, right? Like you're on one, like, how do you manage that
Mm.
letting go of one to go to the next? Because you're doing a lot of trapeze jumping, it
Yeah.
seems.
Well, you know me. I actually plan quite a bit. When I wrapped my personal coaching, when my one-to-one coaching, I made that decision 1 year before I did it. So I actually plan for all of these moves a way in advance.
Yeah.
Uh, and currently planning, for example, in 2 years, we're selling our home and going to be mortgage free. And, all of that, we made the decision 3 years ago. And so we've been working toward that. It's a 3 year decision, a 3 year execution. So I will say that, yes, it looks like I'm hanging like a monkey jumping from trapeze to trapeze, but I'm really not. I'm making these decisions very calculated based on a lot of pros and cons, discussions with my family, and all sorts of things.
Yeah, so you've just brought up something really interesting because it's on the one hand the flavor of freedom, and then on the other hand the flavor of like goals and planning and calculation. They can sometimes feel like they're a bit mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
But what is amazing to me is not only that you are using them together, but that you're doing it quickly.
Mm.
Does that make
Hmm.
sense? Like what I just sort of acknowledged in what you're up to.
Yeah, I am doing it relatively quickly, and I was having a conversation last night. I think I live a little bit on if you know how when you speed up a podcast to 1.25, I think that's kind of the
Hmm.
my pace in life. Um,
And none
and
of my listeners speed up the podcast. I just know
okay.
they don't.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just
no,
kidding. They
no.
probably do.
I actually don't when I listen to podcasts, but that's just an interesting metaphor. I think that
Yeah.
I definitely do things quickly. I've always moved quickly. In fact, I had to figure out earlier on to slow down a little bit. So I
Mm.
actually have done that, especially with bigger decisions. There's something about as well the having the mindset around learning, and there's no mistakes, and just seeing everything as a large experiment and discovery that helps with moving more quickly sometimes.
Hmm. It's reminding me of something you and I talked about so many times when we were doing that adaptive action research, the balance between structure and flow.
Yes. Yes. I thought of that a minute ago too. And and I know when we spoke, I always really felt that the structure supported the flow.
Hmm.
And I know there's different ideas about that. And for me, it's very true that the structure and the boundaries and the limits really support then that having that feeling of freedom and flow in my life.
Hmm. And I think, I'll just let people know that, in Myers-Briggs, Jen and I are the uh, opposites in the dichotomy of how we organize our life. So you would prefer J, and I would prefer P. And so that whole, it was fun that we were working this whole research together, because for me, for so much of my life, it was just about get everything done just so I can have absolutely free time, unspoken, nobody needs me for anything kind of thing. And when I got it, I could go so far overboard, and then I'd sort of poke my head up, look around and go, oh, what was I doing? And then just feel completely scattered. And I think in my partnership with you, Jen, I've really appreciated the synergy of needing the J in order to really enjoy the P.
Mm,
So almost said another way, it's what you were saying before about like having finitude gives you that beautiful sense of freedom. Like it's so paradoxical what we're talking about. Do you
I
see that
know.
as well?
I do. And, on the other side, having your perspective from the P place, to challenge sometimes too rigid, like I can get and feel for others very rigid. It has really actually helped me find the right line there for me and how I want to show up and how I want to impact others too. So your P energy had, helped me establish a more healthy line there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we just keep coming back to the same place. It's the yin and yang of structure and flow, and that there is the beauty that structure releases in flow, and the beauty that flow releases in structure. So,
Mhm.
if you're out there listening and you're one of those people that's super organized, maybe where are the places where you could let it flow a little bit? And for those who are more inclined to just sort of shoot from the hip, where could you perhaps try out a little bit of structure just as a way to enhance the overall experience?
Mm.
So, I'm just going to reference that podcast I did again, Jen. So I floated Oliver Berkman's idea of how people might use their time differently now if they
Yeah.
knew they were never going to get a handle on time management. So, how does that idea sit with you? And do
Yeah.
you think you could ever let go entirely of getting a handle on managing time?
No. And but him and I actually believe in the same thing. We believe that there's limits and there's power in limits. What I think, and I'm making an assumption based on what I heard and how I heard it, but he believes that because time is a limited resource, that you should release control on it. And I can see his point, for some, right? But I'm very talented at managing my time, and it's a skill that
Yeah.
I've honed it, and it requires discipline. So it doesn't just require skill, it requires discipline. And for me, that combination works really well, and I feel like I'm living a great life and a great experience in life. So I think for some, his approach will work, where maybe those two things, they either don't have or don't want to develop that skill, and that's fine. There's no right way. Or they don't have or don't want to develop the discipline, and then just letting go is probably a really great way to try to do it, because
Hmm.
unless you really, because you do, I do spend a lot of time managing my time.
Yeah. And that's an interesting idea. So, how much time do you spend managing your time, and what does that actually look like?
Yeah. Well, I have like a power hour that I dedicate, and I typically don't do a lot of work on Fridays that work on me. I work on stuff I need to do in my life. But Thursdays around 2 p.m., I have this power hour in my calendar, and I look ahead to the next week. I do any follow up that I would need to do with people for meetings. I make decisions about whether the week looks the way I want it to, and I make
Hmm.
adjustments. So I dedicate an hour every Thursday, and if I have something Friday or I have more to do, I'll move that hour. But that hour happens, that hour happens every week, and that's probably about what I spend on it, though,
Hmm.
about a week. But it's concentrated, and I know what I want my week to look and feel like. So it's really a matter of just looking at the calendar and going, does that look and feel how I want it to look and feel, and then making tweaks.
Yeah. Okay. So two things come up for me. So an hour sounds like a short time compared to what I'm up to. So I'm very curious, and maybe we can unpack some of your techniques in that hour.
Yeah.
But then secondarily, you said, I look at my next week and I see if it looks the way I want it to look. So I think what is implied in that is that you have an ability perhaps to do last minute shifting.
Yeah.
Whereas I think one of the biggest barriers that I've heard from leaders when they're trying to manage time is that, like, where do you even just get the shoehorn in? Because next
Yeah.
week I can't move anything.
Yeah.
So say a
Yeah.
little bit about that. How do you then tweak your week next
Yeah.
week?
You start 4 weeks out. You start 4
Haha,
weeks
good.
out. You start 4 weeks out, and then, you reverse. So when I did work one-on-one with leaders, that was always what would come up, and I said, "Okay, let's move out to the next week. Let's move out." Sometimes it was 8 weeks with someone who was very senior, especially in healthcare, as we
Hmm.
discussed. And then we start building in that power hour. We start building in that the reflection. It's really in the reflection that you gain complete control of, well, not complete control, but a lot more control of your time in general. So as long as you can take that time to reflect and look wherever, and then start building it in closer as you've built time into your calendar and as you've made tweaks.
Right. And I completely agree with that. And I guess what I'm wondering is, so you've got what sounds like a habit, right? You're
Yeah.
doing it. It's, if it's coming, you probably can feel the itch if you're, pressed for time or whatever, it's going to happen. So with these senior leaders that you have to go 8 weeks out in their calendar to start to be able to have a little agency, it's a real front loading investment. Then it seems to me, this process. So in the meantime, then like, what would you say to people to kind of like believe in the dream? You're not
Yeah.
going to start to feel the effects for 8 weeks, but like, how would you frame that?
Yeah. Well, I do, even if we start 8 weeks out, I do, though, I do sneak in. 15 minutes in the next week of reflection. So for me, the
Mm,
key to, like what you said, agency, and agency is also a belief system. So there are people that believe they have agency, and there are people that don't. And even people that, work for someone else, there's people that believe that they have more agency than others. So agency is an ingredient here. And if your belief system is such that you don't have agency, then unfortunately you likely won't experience the kind of freedom ever, because it starts with beliefs, right? So talking about the beliefs and talking about how much agency you really believe you have, and sometimes challenging that a little bit with people.
mhm,
um,
mhm.
and then and then and then getting in that first 15 minutes of reflective space, and then I micromanage as a coach for a few weeks. I do, like, micromanaging sometimes, it's got a bad rap, but when you're helping someone develop a habit, I put it in my calendar, and when I know that they're going to do that reflection, and I follow up. So you need a partner. I think you and I had a partnership, so it doesn't have to be a
Yeah,
coach. You need a partner in this process. It can be anyone who's willing to just hold you accountable to reflect. You will find, though, that in that first, if someone does that first 15 minutes of reflection in that week, they start to feel differently. They start to feel more powerful. They start to actually be able to tweak things because they realize that they have more agency and control than they think. And
yeah,
so, yeah, good point. We start looking further out, but we start reflecting for a very small amount of time every week first,
right.
and that starts to create the change in the momentum.
So it sounds like you're really setting up these incremental small wins, and almost sounds like what you're also doing, what is also occurring in a more subtle way, is that their sense of agency might also be increasing alongside that.
Yes, I think with reflection on time and making tweaks and making requests, because you start by saying, I can't, I can't do that. There's too many people involved, or to make a change there. But once you position it as, well, why don't you make a request, versus like you have to change it, people start to see that many people actually want to help people have more balance or figure it out. So
Mhm.
making one request of someone that has a commitment with them can start to change their beliefs too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fully. And I know I was working with a group of leaders in municipal government the other day. And at the beginning of the day, the number one barrier to being able to do any sort of personal reflection, individual, professional development, all that kind of stuff was, of course, time. But as the day went along and they had the opportunity to dig a little deeper and really understand the sheer lack of presence they were actually having in the meetings that they were having, they recognized the correlation of their participation style with the like very low outcomes of these meetings and how incredibly inefficient they were. So through this process of actually, and not everybody can take a day away from their work, I get that, and these people were lucky that they got to actually experience what you and I are talking about, which is there is a great big illusion out there about the lack of agency, which is, I think, a great place I want to segue in, because you and I have both spent time working inside healthcare, and we well recall the culture of overwhelm and busyness, right? It's
Yeah.
just like, in fact, that's how we met, through that
Yeah.
adaptive action project. Now, from my point of view, so I'm still supporting a number of leaders in healthcare, it's still very much the same, if not even more challenging since
Mhm.
COVID.
Mhm.
Okay, million dollar question.
Yeah.
What do you think it is that makes it so difficult for large
Mhm.
systems to shift that culture? We can
Mhm.
call it time management, we can call it, having more agency, because we've sort of expanded to include that. But what makes it so difficult?
Mm. Well, I think it starts at the fundamental belief that's driving how our that system is set up. And, I don't actually know what that is. I've thought a lot about it. I do think that that system invites very giving, boundaryless in ways people, in some ways, because they're drawn to help others. The purpose is so clear.
Mm,
So and very often people that are very giving, people that are very caring and empathetic, really struggle with boundaries. right? And so to bring them all together into a system, and have a very traditional approach in terms of how it runs, and hierarchical too, I think then creates this, this energy of, we have to give. And then this is the closest I've gotten to what I think the belief could be underneath. It would be such a good
Hmm.
question to ask, like if we could get in there and really ask, like, what do you think is driving this system to act this way? I think it really comes from wanting to make a difference, wanting to give, but
Yeah.
not actually seeing the value in how, having those boundaries can actually support that. And you and I also know, and I worked with a number of physician leaders, with senior leaders in healthcare. Burnout is very real. There are
Yeah.
way too many right now, people that are just absolutely at their end. And that, I think that, we're coming off of the pandemic as well. But I think, my hope is that with this, there will be this, um, potential, invitation to actually
Hmm.
recreate it in a different way. What do you
Hmm.
think, though? Like, when I throw that to you as like that this giving piece, like, what do you think about that?
I think it's really fascinating, and I think that I hadn't linked it up quite so succinctly as you had. And so I just noticed I had a bit of an aha in that moment, that people that are coming, you could call healthcare like a romance industry, like people come for their heart, right? And
Yes.
that I really appreciate your noticing the pairing that often comes with potentially poor boundaries. So that would answer, I think, a lot of the patterns that we see. Like, for instance, I was blown away when I started working in healthcare. The meeting culture is like never seen anything like it. It's like mushrooms grow
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
But more specifically, how people would not block time between meetings. And so I remember I used to giggle about it at the first part because it was before COVID when everything was virtual. And I used to say, well, how are you going to time travel up to the fifth floor? Like, how's that going to work for you? Not to mention the fact that anything that gets discussed in the meeting that becomes an action item that you've now taken on, like, do you even know what you're doing? When you're going to do it? How you're going to do it? Like, when does all that get sorted if you're in meetings all day long? So I think a combination of like the lack of boundaries as you're describing. And then I also think we create almost a kind of a sucking culture where you're just like, the culture is so powerful
Mm,
that it's too hard to stand against it.
yeah.
And I know that for myself, my decision to leave healthcare and support it from the outside in was the recognition of how many sandbags it would take to
Mm,
stem the flow that was trying to get me to go in that surge.
mm,
I mean, I'm a pretty conscious person about this, as are you, and I would find myself falling in these holes and being overbooked. And oh, for almost forgot this part, ended up going on a stress leave. So yeah, right there in the middle of it, I recall how difficult it was. And so while I think I could probably have continued to sandbag, I didn't want to. And I knew that there was other work that I wanted to put that energy into. But it is fascinating because I think we did see that possibility emerge 6 months into COVID, where people were recognizing that it was extreme circumstances. And so they were pulling out all the stops, and we were seeing teams like change direction, pivot, shift policies in a fraction of the time that it normally took. So there was this like little high where people were sort of going, this is amazing, we can do it. And then, of course, I think people were kind of going, okay, well, so now shouldn't this be back to normal? And it wasn't, not only after 6 months, but 2 years. I still think it isn't back to normal. So yeah,
uh,
it's a complicated one.
it is, and I resonate with your reasoning for leaving, in mine very clearly seeing that if I wanted to stay internal, and be part of that internal, that it would take just this incredible amount of energy from
Yeah,
me to withstand, the force of the energy of the system. And
yeah.
it just wasn't serving me personally. And then I chose to support from the outside in.
Hey, You're listening to The Squeeze. And if you like what you're hearing, there's a whole world of citrus coaching to discover. We've got an online leadership program. It's called Citrus U, and it features those 3 key tools you need to be a better leader, well, to be a better human. We also have a number of mini learning bundles that you can get into, and there's plenty more. If you're interested, you can follow us on Instagram or check out our website at www.citruscoaching.com. And the show resumes now. And I think it's really interesting too, because, even with this group I was working with the other day, they kept talking about the organization as that thing over there. And so I had to pull on that. I think it's Robert Short. I'm probably saying the wrong name, but his quote is like, the organization is not out there outside of you. It's right here. It's in you. You are the organization. And, so I think that on the flip, that almost kept me in longer perhaps than I needed to be, because I thought, okay, well, I am the change, right? Gandhi, I am the change I want to see in this organization. And I think there's truth to that, right? It's the old starfish story that I think many of us learned in coach training way back in the beginning. Beach full of starfish baking in the sun, kid throwing one at a time into the water. Old guy comes up and goes, this is going to take you forever. That's not going to make a difference. And kid chucks starfish number 70, whatever, in the water and goes, well, it made a difference to that one. And I think that was definitely a way that I really tried to, contribute in that world. And I think eventually the size of the system and the slowness of the shifts kind of got to me. And that's where I thought, okay, I need to go find a beach where I can, make a bigger change. Was that similar for you, do you think?
Yeah, it was. And you're making me think of something that I bump up against a lot with regards to boundaries. It often comes up in any discussion, is the emotional intelligence concept of stay or cut bait. And to go with the fishing kind of ocean analogy, um, is this idea that in every person, and it's based on how we were brought up and raised in our secure or insecure attachment, we have within us the ability to sometimes cut bait, and sometimes stay too long. The opposite of that is staying too long in systems, relationships, and anything that is not healthy. And so I think in us, in this case, we're exercising a healthy aspect of emotional intelligence to see the opportunity to separate, right? Because it wasn't serving us. And so and I think that's a really interesting concept for people to think about for themselves and to consider their patterns there. And I still see and sometimes see myself with sometimes I cut bait very quickly and easily. And so when I made that decision, I had to ask myself, is that's what's going on here? But I was able to determine, no, this was a healthy decision. But I think it's important when you think about boundaries, you think about your patterns with that particular aspect of self.
That's a great point. I love that. That's a really good metaphor. And I think you and I have had so many conversations over the years about what we've actually been trying to do, which is, largely to a point anyway, support leaders,
Mm.
develop leaders. And then we've looked at all these different sort of vehicles and ways to sort of amplify what it is we're doing. And so I think also inside of a big system, there, like, I was one coach, you were one coach, and I worked in an organization of 26,000. I don't know how big yours was, but pretty big.
Yeah.
And now we're on the outside. We've had lots of years of playing with different, sort of different delivery methods. I think I've referenced a number of those in the introduction that you've been working on and doing. I've also been playing with this idea of amplification beyond sort of that one-on-one framework. So I guess I'm curious, since you and I left paid employment, you and I have participated in lots of collaborations together. In fact, I'll just reference that after, when COVID got going, as a sort of solo consultant, feeling a little bit disconnected perhaps after all my team time, I sort of just invited a few people in to kind of coalesce around something we could do to support healthcare workers, which ended up kind of becoming this small group that we called Elevate Leadership Alliance, ELA, and that was great. I think there was about 6 of us, 7 of us. We started up a Facebook group. We were trying to find ways that we could support healthcare workers. We were doing some pro bono stuff with some of the health authorities. Anyway, as we were like participating in all those types of collaborations, like you and I think have really enjoyed a synergy. And I think a lot of that comes from our understanding of our differences and our similarities and being able to leverage that. I think it's also really easy for a group to come together, be like-minded and just really collaborate. And I think it's also super, super healthy mental health wise. I think we've also recognized, you and I, that sometimes execution and follow through can be a bit tricky. So it's like my husband always says, "Oh, yeah, I'm the purveyor of ideas. Yeah, I got ideas. I'm the idea man." I think ideas are really the easy part. But when people have different styles and different needs, I'm curious, like, what advice you would have for someone out there who's trying to navigate that balance between sort of that innovation, right? Like, this is so fun. We're brainstorming, look at all these things, and the actual execution, which I actually believe you are quite strong at. What would be the sort of advice you might give to folks in
Yeah.
that situation?
Yeah. Well, two things come up. I think individual discipline and group, on the individual front, it takes discipline. Everybody wants to just spur ideas all day. I would like to as well. Um, and I can come up with some great ones. But really execution is a skill. It takes discipline. So individual discipline. And so that's one thing, but how do you access people's where they're at with that? Because again, and discipline is a choice and some people don't want it or need it and live life fine. When you interact with a group though, it's like you're signing up to be part of something. And so with the way that I think we can access that when in our collaborations is to absolutely pause and have ground rules, have those alliance forming discussions up front. We all knew in our collaboration we had a similar purpose, and that was enough. And the purpose also why we formed two brought us together and gave us
Mhm.
something. We were getting something out of it too. When it evolved to wanting to do more and create stuff, that's when we were trying to develop those ground rules, right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because you sometimes get together out of passion and excitement, and then though it hits a point, it can hit a point where you discover that you know to get things done there needs to be a little more structure, right?
Yep.
Once again the structure comes in to support the work. And so I think knowing, and it's not like I look at people and I say, I guess you're, I sum them up and say like you're not disciplined. But I have to say, when I do any partnership or collaboration now, I do suss that out to an extent, because I don't want to collaborate with someone that doesn't have a similar commitment to that, because it's hard. and
Yeah.
and I just don't feel like it would, serve anyone. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think
Hmm.
discipline and ground rules.
Yeah. So for someone who's hearing the word discipline and cringing and maybe even starting to edge out of the room, how would you help that person fall in love with discipline?
Mm. That's a good question. I mean, I think I don't know if it's easy to fall in love with it. It brings up, like, I right now I'm working around the concept of accountability, and I was recently in an organization and they said, "Can we not use that word?" I'm like, "No, I'm not the person for you, because I'm not going to change, like, I'm not going to change the word." Right?
What was the word they wanted, just out of
I
curiosity?
asked that and they were like, responsibility. And I'm like, yeah, but it's different. I can define both very
Yeah.
clearly. They're different.
Yeah.
And, when you sign up to be part of an organization, there's a certain level of responsibility and accountability. Accountability, though, is a personal choice, and just like discipline. So I don't know how to help someone except to start to think about, you know, what they, um, what they actually really want to achieve, and then
Yeah.
that it's really about being motivated, because motivation is what actually I think helps create discipline. It actually fuels the, and discipline is, I know it's a loaded word. It just fuels the energy. We can just call it energy and commitment, right?
Yeah.
To do something. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
I
don't
think we
know.
almost have another yin yang on our hands here.
Yeah,
When we talk about the structure and flow of time management, with actually getting stuff that we want or achieving stuff or moving in a direction, like the discipline has to be there, the balance with the idea, right? So just when we're thinking about collaboration, and I really appreciate your rigor and holding that line and not like being willing to change the word, because I agree that there is rigor for a reason. And I don't know, maybe I don't want to segue too far out into space, but if you look at our sort of some of the cultural elements that we're seeing reflected in popular culture right now around, I mean, you'd think that we all had nerves on the outside of our skin. Like we're all being so careful, and
yeah,
everybody is really trying to soften. So even just to take the word accountability away, I think it would be a big loss. I think you'd actually like miss a very important ingredient of what is required actually to do anything, to get anywhere in life.
yeah. And absolutely, with anything we do with others has to come empathy. You can do
Yeah.
anything if you have true empathy and if you care. Empathy,
Right.
I heard the other day that compassion is empathy in action. I liked that a lot.
Hmm.
I'm not, I need to think more about it, but I liked it at my,
Hmm.
I want to think more about it. And I think that with accountability, it's actually, you're holding someone creative, resourceful, and able to
Yeah.
achieve. It's not achieving for the sake of achieving something that they want, or that has been a goal that has been set. So yeah, I don't think I'll ever shy away from using that word, even though you're
Hmm.
right, everything is softening. I don't think we can soften there.
Hmm. Well, I think if we do, we're going to see some unintended consequences, which perhaps we weren't sort of prepared for. I'm really struck by the theme of the sort of the yin and the yang, and
Hmm.
the balance of these different sort of polarities that we're looking at, because I think that in itself is fascinating. That it seems that our mind, our very basic average mind, just really wants to polarize in black and white. And I think that's part of our need for control. But really, what I'm really leaning into, and maybe it's a stage of life, is just that there is so much more aliveness in the balancing of those two places. That it's not it's not if it. I'm really mixing myself up. It's not one or the other.
No.
It's the combination of those two things is actually what is creating the thing that I am,
Mm.
valuing, but also most in sync with, I think.
I love that. I definitely want to think about that with regards to others, because we've talked about a couple here. I
Mhm.
bet there's, I bet there's, I bet there's lots
I'm
more.
sure there's
Yeah,
loads.
yeah, yeah.
So let me take a little decidedly, I don't know, lighthearted direction here. Just, I could see you and I carrying on a conversation for a while. And I remember when that new app came out. What was it called? Clubhouse, I think. And
Yes.
I got a secret invite or whatever, and we thought it was all going to be the new Twitter. It wasn't. And you and I set up and had a conversation, and like they beat the door down, like the bouncers were turning them away, and actually, I don't think anybody came and listened to us, but
No.
all to say, I think when we put our mind to it, we're interested in so many of the same things. We're interested not just in the what, but the how, and the subtleties, and all the while learning about ourselves as we go through it. So easy to fill up lots more time.
Yeah.
And I want to also manage time, because that's kind of what we're talking about. So just for kicks,
Yeah.
bucket lists.
Yeah.
Bucket lists. Everybody's talking about them.
Yeah.
Love them or hate them, and why?
Yeah. It's interesting because my daughter just did one for the summer, and you had sent me the questions to think about in advance of this, and so I had already had an answer there. But it's interesting because I was going to say I'm pretty neutral on them, but it shifted a little because she has some pretty cool stuff on there, like little amazing, like fly a kite, and then I just put it out on my Buy Nothing group. My daughter wants to fly a kite, and I got 4 beautiful kites. So now everyone in our family is going to go fly a kite on the beach in Birch Bay, and I'm excited for that. Right?
Oh,
I
I
know.
love
So
it.
yeah. So, but what I was going to say before, like, so I don't have a bucket list, but I tend to create like micro bucket lists. So like
Mhm.
little tiny, we'll call them like cups, like micro cup lists for particular time, like a vacation
Yeah.
or a particular like phase. Like this summer, I look at
Mm,
things in like
hmm.
quarters, right? And and that's mostly because over the last little while, I've realized that long-term planning is really just a fairy tale. So I'm more interested in like shorter term planning. So a bucket list to me would be important for like a period of time that's not too far away.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to ask you about buy nothing in a second, but before I do, I'm when I'm recording this, I'm literally on the day before I'm off for the summer. And so I really love the idea of like just a small focus because I mean, bucket list, right? It's a kick the bucket list, right? That's what the name is about, which is to me strikes me as anyway, whatever. So I really love the idea of I'm going to actually I think I'm going to sit down and come up with something for the summer
Yeah,
because I love that idea. Okay, now you referenced the Buy Nothing group. What the heck
right.
was that?
Oh my goodness. So in every community, like pretty much this is a movement, you'll have one near you. It's actually a micro, so there's a finite area. Now it's very geographical based,
Hmm.
and the idea is to create community in a very finite area. So there's boundaries of the location, and you can ask or you can gift. And ours is super active. There's, we had to
Love it.
cap it at 1,000. 1,000 people like east of the Seymour River, like it's very finite. So the other beauty of that is I'm never driving to White Rock to pick up a kite, right? I'm staying in the North Van area that I live in. And so that's the whole
Wow.
point of these. But what it
Huh.
does is it creates community. So just to make that connection, I actually posted my daughter's bucket list on the Buy Nothing group because, and I got like 100 comments and exchanges with people that some I knew, some I don't, because it's within the community around, just how cool that was. And so sharing the idea of doing a bucket list with your kids came from that, and many families decided to do it as a result. But the point of the group is to actually give and receive goods, give and receive goods, and there's no cost, and you share, you give, you let it simmer. So that's like big concept with the Buy Nothing. So how on Marketplace or on other places it's like
Hmm.
first come first serve, get
Yeah.
here today. Well,
Yeah.
no, the point of this is you put a dog toy on there and you say, tell me why your dog would love this, or post a picture of your dog, and I'm going to choose from the pictures like who I give it to. So it's really about creating story, creating community, and not consuming, helping your neighbors with their needs from the community. So it's a really beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
What I love so much about it is the combination of online and actually neighborhood, like physical
yes,
space that you could walk potentially to
yeah,
people's. I love that. Okay, well, I'm definitely going to check that out. Okay, nice. Thanks for the tip.
yeah,
Last bonus
yeah,
question
yeah,
before we wrap up, and you've been super generous. I love this time. Chat GPT.
yeah.
Tried it yet?
Yes, yes. The jury is out on that. I mean, there's so much to think about there. What I'm really interested in is what I'm seeing. I have 2 daughters, and how this is evolving their relationship with their learning and their teachers and the rules. And so it's really interesting to see that play out. That's the real important thing for me in it, and then the bigger concept of AI in general and how that is going to evolve our society. But again, maybe it's because I'm overwhelmed by it, but I'm most interested in how it's impacting them right now and how they're learning from it, but also how it's supporting their learning. And the
Mhm.
best use of it that I've heard of, because I asked people about it, is I had a leader tell me that they use it to play the devil's advocate with their decisions. So
Hmm.
that I thought was a really good use. So it's like, I'm thinking of doing this. What am I not thinking about? And
Whoa.
I know.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So that when I heard that, I was like, that can be a very powerful tool because all that information out there that's synthesized, that's coming through this,
Hmm.
this app or whatever we want to call it is could be useful if you just want to expand the knowledge on something or have you think about
Hmm.
something that you're not
Hmm.
thinking about. So that's what I'll say. That's what I might use it for in the near future. What do you think?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I'm trying everything and anything.
Yeah.
I shouldn't uh I shouldn't say it, but I will because it's completely changed since then. So don't worry, Robin, when you're listening to this, if you are. So Mark and I actually were using it to help him start to write his speech for Robin's wedding.
Yay.
So what I'm really struck by is for some reason, I'm really good at prompts. And
Okay.
I think that's like, and I really suck at Google prompts because I put too much stuff in. And I don't know if you remember back when Ask Jeeves was around, but like that's how I would formulate my searches. So when I do ChatGPT, I'll write often two full paragraphs. I'll talk about the tone I want. I'll talk about, some of my cautions. I'll talk about the key points. I'll talk about how many sentences, and then I just click and I go away and I come back. And I've used it for numerous different purposes. I was designing a course, I needed a synopsis. So I just plugged in what the key points were and what I wanted the takeaways to be, what the tone would be, what the leader, level would be. And it was just like, wow, amazing. And all of this to say that when I was and I've been following AI very, very closely, listening to interviews with Sam Altman, the CEO of Open AI, and I felt so much trepidation, and I still do, but more around general intelligence. And I won't, go down that rabbit hole. But there's a way that I was really afraid for the loss of jobs for writers, of which I'm one. And I just started seeing everything on Reddit, all the subreddits talking about job loss, and
Mm.
so I kind of got into that mode of feeling that way. But I actually realized that ChatGPT is actually helping my writing. And I really never thought I'd say that in a million years, because it doesn't get the final authority. It doesn't have my sort of unique ideas. I plant those ideas and it just sort of throws in additional things. So, yeah, and I'm not using the paid version yet. I may move into that. I understand there's a lot of new options with, just graphics and different, more creative outcomes. But for the time being, yeah, I'm kind of surprised. Didn't see that one coming.
No, no, and it's really important, I think, to try, like you say, everything. I mean, we cannot, I don't think, I cannot just let this stuff go and say, like I want to be
Yeah.
involved and learn about it so that I can be educated and make
Yeah.
yeah, make full use of everything that's out there in the world. So
Yeah. Well, and so, and I've said this to my listeners the last couple of podcasts. I get so excited. I talk so fast. The last couple of podcasts I've referenced that I'm in process of researching an episode on AI. So that is something that's fascinating. And I mean, half the reason, I would say more than half the reason I do podcasting is because I'm just so interested in learning. And so I have to do these deep dives and then the bonus and what's beginning to happen now is people are listening and getting back to me, such as you did, such as Bryn did in the last episode, hearing things, wanting to talk further. And so it's granting me this desire of the community around the conversation of these things. And so, Jen, you and I have had, connection through many different vehicles over the years. It's quite profound. And now here we are, and you're a guest on this podcast episode, of which I'm super grateful for. So I want to just like take a moment to acknowledge like the years we've had, and appreciating you for all you've taught me, and just the way that we found the synergy of our. I'm doing the sign of the yin and yang right now. So yeah, full
Mhm.
gratitude to you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your voice.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to, expand my understanding of why I was so connected to that concept that brought, this idea to speak further about it of finitude together. And since that, I've thought so much about it, and I really appreciate your podcast and the depth that you go to help explore topics in a way that is really fulsome and invites people to think. So thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're welcome. So, if you're interested in learning more about Jen, I'll have all kinds of things in the show notes so you can check her out. But yeah, so in the meantime, thanks again, Jen, for being our guest today. And for folks listening, if you want to comment, questions, anything like that, feel free. Otherwise, until next time. So, you've been listening to The Squeeze. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to continue tuning in, don't forget to click subscribe. And as always, we want to hear your thoughts, your comments, your feedback, and challenges if there's anything you don't agree with. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.